Hi, fellow Pennsylvanians and friends old and new. Greetings and thank you for joining me today. My name is Michael Smith. This is the first video in a series that will detail the legal case of the Smith family versus St. Luke's Hospital and many other parties. The goal of this video series is to bring attention to the moral and legal abuses by not only St. Luke's Hospital but its affiliates, but by the Bethlehem Police Department and the Monroe County Children and Youth Services. What follows is a tale of a newborn child being separated from his family without good cause, and the lengths that St. Luke's Hospital and the local police and Monroe County CYS would go to cause needless trauma to myself, my wife, and my newborn baby child. I hope you feel compelled by the facts of the case to learn more about our plight and what you can do to help. I would also like to thank Peter Hall and Leaf Grease of the Allentown Morning Call for writing an article that accurately portrays the position of my family. I would also like to thank MSN.com for picking up the story on its homepage. If you would like to read the article for yourself, you can find a link to it below. I am now going to read the first 99 or so facts of the case as they appear in the federal complaint. If you would like to follow along, please click the link below, which is a link to the docket. So there's another link below to the docket. So with all of that in mind, Alia Iacta Est. The facts of the case in chronology. The plaintiff Smith family moved to Monroe County, PA from Delaware County, PA during the week prior to the birth of plaintiff's newborn baby Jazz. So we moved here a week before our baby was born. Sometime in the week preceding the birth of plaintiff newborn baby Jazz, Mrs. Smith called St. Luke's Hospital and inquired as to what the typical length of stay for a vaginal delivery without any complications would be in light of the COVID-19 virus pandemic. The phone representative of St. Luke's Hospital was not sure what the answer to plaintiff Mrs. Smith's inquiry was, so she instructed Mrs. Smith that another representative of defendant St. Luke's Hospital would return her call with an appropriate answer. And an individual holding themselves out as a representative of St. Luke's Hospital returned her call at a later time and conveyed to Mrs. Smith that the expected time that a mother would likely be discharged is 24 hours after a successful vaginal delivery without complications in light of the COVID-19 virus pandemic. Then, on Thursday, April 8th, 2021, at approximately 12:14 p.m., plaintiff Mrs. Smith's water broke. Yay! Here comes our fourth kid. On Thursday, April 8th, 2021, at approximately 1:42 p.m., plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Mr. Smith, arrived at St. Luke's Hospital in Easton, PA. Initial intake of plaintiff Mrs. Smith was at a reception desk on floor 2 of the Women and Babies Pavilion. And the intake receptionist used old information from Mrs. Smith's previous medical records as a basis to label Mrs. Smith's intake wristband Osmond as opposed to which was her maiden name. Mr. and Mrs. Smith advised the intake receptionist that the last name represented on the wristband was an error and that Mrs. Smith had been married for 7 years now. Happily, I hope she would say. Mr. and Mrs. Smith advised the intake receptionist that the appropriate name for Mrs. Smith's medical file shall be Smith and not Osmond, and that Mrs. Smith's medical wristband should reflect that fact. Even after being shown identification by both plaintiffs, myself and my wife, the intake receptionist did not believe assertions by Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who then had to strongly insist that the medical information for Mrs. Smith be labeled appropriately, as should be the same for our soon-to-be-born child. The intake receptionist insisted that plaintiff Mrs. Smith's maiden name would suffice for the defendant St. Luke's Hospital's purposes. Shortly thereafter, Mr. and Mrs. Smith were taken to a triage room. Once in the triage room, the intake nurse stated that Mrs. Smith's married name should be on Mrs. Smith's wristband and not the plaintiff's maiden name. The intake nurse left the triage room and returned with a new wristband in which Grace Smith was handwritten on the wristband. At this point, there was no indication that the intake nurse nor anyone else had changed or updated Mrs. Smith's electronic hospital chart to reflect her current married last name as it was handwritten on the plaintiff's wristband. During the triage procedure, Mrs. Smith provided a urine sample and had her blood drawn for testing. During the triage procedure, Mrs. Smith provided St. Luke's Hospital with a paper printed version of her most current medical records, which had been updated less than a week prior. Contained in the medical records that were provided to St. Luke's Hospital was Mrs. Smith's legal prescription for the amphetamine Vyvanse. Mrs. Smith's prescription for Vyvanse during pregnancy had been reviewed and approved by 3 prior medical doctors, including Mrs. Smith's obstetrician and psychiatrist. The records of the prior examinations and approvals for Vyvanse as a legal prescription for Mrs. Smith were contained within the paper medical records provided to defendant St. Luke's Hospital. Contained in the medical records that were provided to the hospital was Mrs. Smith's legal prescription for marijuana as well. St. Luke's Hospital requested to copy the records and then return the original copy to Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith consented to her medical records being copied by St. Luke's Hospital staff and returned. A representative of St. Luke's Hospital removed the records from the presence of the plaintiffs, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and returned a short while later, asserting that she had indeed made a copy of Mrs. Smith's medical records for inclusion in her current medical file. And then the original copies were returned to us. Mrs. Smith then orally reviewed the same medical history that was reflected in the medical records that she had just submitted to St. Luke's Hospital with a member of St. Luke's staff. So they now had an intake triage oral history that reflected the same exact information that was just copied by St. Luke's staff and returned to the plaintiffs. The oral record as presented by Mrs. Smith exactly concurred with the written record that she provided to them. So, it's obvious that we weren't lying about anything if everything matched up exactly, right? Information on how to verify Mrs. Smith's medical records was contained in the medical records she provided to St. Luke's Hospital. Not one of St. Luke's Hospital staff, employees, or agents held out to Mr. and Mrs. Smith that the veracity of Mrs. Smith's medical records were in question. So no one questioned us as to whether or not what we gave, the information that we gave to St. Luke's was truthful. No one said anything to us. Here's the first name in the story. Her name is Ms. Kathy Lakatosh, RN. She's a nurse, a representative of St. Luke's Hospital, commented throughout the intake triage process things such as, "You two appear to be running from the law." She really said this, because our last name is Smith and that we had just moved to the area. The aforementioned joke made by Ms. Lakatosh was made on at least 3 occasions. She really did say it 3 times. It was weird, to say the least. Neither my wife nor I responded positively to this joke that we were criminals. Then here comes in Ms. Marilyn Economidis, MD. She was the medical doctor in charge of examining Mrs. Smith during the triage. Dr. Economidis placed in Mrs. Smith's medical records a diagnosis of 38 weeks gestation of pregnancy and VBAC. VBAC is medical shorthand for vaginal birth after cesarean. So our first child was born by C-section, but we had 2 other children vaginally since then. So Dr. Economidis did not mention Vyvanse or marijuana as potential birth complications in Mrs. Smith's medical records, nor did Dr. Economidis mention methamphetamine as a potential birth complication in Mrs. Smith's medical records. Dr. Economidis did not mention any signs or symptoms of methamphetamine use as a potential birth complication in Mrs. Smith's medical records. Let's see. Dr. Economidis did record, based on her triage, that she expected a routine birth and anticipated successful vaginal delivery, which is exactly what did happen. Dr. Economidis did not question the validity of any of the oral or written medical record presented to her by the plaintiff. Let's see. Mrs. Smith's medical records indicate that Mrs. Smith was not expected to remain at defendant St. Luke's Hospital for more than 2 midnights. So, that lined up more or less with 24 hours, depending on how that 24 hours is split, 2 midnights. It says 24 to 36 hours, logically. Dr. Economidis did record, based on her triage, 3 pregnancy complications: 1, marijuana use during pregnancy; 2, use of Vyvanse during pregnancy; and 3, prior CS followed by VBAC times 2, which is the prior cesarean, followed by 2 vaginal births. Okay, so Vyvanse and marijuana consumption are not listed as pregnancy complications. Are not pregnancy complications. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Vyvanse and marijuana consumption are not pregnancy complications. Dr. Economides did record marijuana under the heading of substance and drug abuse and not as a prescription medication in the appropriate category as reflected in Grace's, Mrs. Smith's medical records. Without any rational cause, defendant St. Luke's Hospital was monitoring Mrs. Smith's behavior to ensure that she remained cooperative. This is literally listed in your medical records with St. Luke's staff. St. Luke's Hospital did not ever have a psychiatrist examine plaintiff Mrs. Smith's well-being or state of mind at any time, ever. So everybody who is making a comment at any time in anybody's medical records, be they my son, my newborn sons, or Mrs. Smith's, did not contain a professional examination by a psychiatrist relating to Mrs. Smith's state of mind or well-being or of newborn baby Jazz at any time. So all of the assertions as to one's mental state of being were done by doctors whose specialty were outside of psychiatry, being the point. Okay. The result of Mrs. Smith's initial lab screenings returned a positive indication of amphetamines, as was to be expected from consuming prescription Vyvanse. Important point coming up next, amphetamines and methamphetamines are similar but chemically distinct substances from one another. Similar is not the same. One is legal if you have a prescription, like the amphetamines. One is not. You cannot get a prescription for the methamphetamines. Okay, so, upon information and belief, defendant St. Luke's Hospital and its agents, employees, and/or assigns prior to birth concluded that they intended to remove plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith's newborn child from the presence of ourselves based upon the erroneous assumption that plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith were or would abuse their newborn child. Upon information and belief, in order to effectuate its desire to separate plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith, defendant St. Luke's and its agents, employees, and/or assigns concocted a methodology to separate plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith from their soon-to-be-born baby. Upon information and belief, in order to effectuate its desire to separate plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith, defendant St. Luke's and its agents, employees, and/or assigns concocted a methodology asserting that plaintiff Mrs. Smith ingested methamphetamine and that she passed the deleterious effects of methamphetamine use onto her newborn child while in utero. So they more or less accused my wife of doing meth. They said, yeah, well, that's it. Upon information and belief, defendant St. Luke's Hospital and its agents, employees, and/or assigns effectuated a coordinated effort to assert that plaintiff Mrs. Smith tested positive for methamphetamine. That. Defendant St. Luke's Hospital, based on its evidence on plaintiff Mrs. Smith being a methamphetamine abuser, defendant St. Luke's Hospital based its evidence on plaintiff Mrs. Smith being a methamphetamine abuser on a chemical test that did not differentiate between legal amphetamines and illegal methamphetamines, which defendant St. Luke's Hospital and its agents, employees, and/or assigns used as evidence to assert that plaintiff Mrs. Smith had ingested methamphetamine, even though she tested positive as a result of plaintiff Mrs. Smith's known prescription use of Vyvanse and amphetamine. Woo! After plaintiff Mrs. Smith's examination was concluded, she and plaintiff Mr. Smith were escorted to the delivery room. Now, you should know at this point that we were oblivious to anything that was happening behind the scenes. No one told us at any point that Grace was suspected of methamphetamine use at any time. No one said that. No one conveyed that to us at any point. We are oblivious. We're going into the delivery room thinking, yay, we're going to have our kid, everything's fine. And it would continue to be from our perspective for, the next, I don't know, 12 to 24 hours. I continue. After Mrs. Smith's examination was concluded, she and Mr. Smith were escorted to the delivery room. Pitocin was administered then by an anesthesiologist. At approximately 11 p.m., Mrs. Smith went into physical labor. Yay! 2 minutes later, Mrs. Smith gave vaginal birth without complications to plaintiff newborn baby Jazz. That's my newborn baby boy! Sucks that I have to call him plaintiff newborn baby Jazz, but hey, he's still my boy. I love him. I'm so happy he's here and healthy now. Thank God he's healthy now. Alright. In his birth assessment, newborn baby Jazz did not have any recorded complications or issues with breathing, grunting, flaring, or signs of stress, according to Dr. Maisel, MD, and Dr. Milthorpe, MD. Without the knowledge and consent of plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith, tissue samples related to the birth of newborn baby Jazz were collected to be tested for methamphetamine and other illicit substances, including the umbilical cord that connected plaintiff Mrs. Smith to plaintiff newborn baby Jazz. So, that. The following morning, another doctor, Dr. Santiago, examined newborn baby Jazz and found him to be healthy. Then, based on the information, so at this point, still, right, next morning, we had her delivery went very well. Grace's delivery went very quickly. Then the next morning, she's feeling as well as you can feel postpartum, but she's eating well. Everything is going well in her body as she adjusts to her postpartum life, and so our mentality is everything's going well, everything's great. So what do? We follow the advice that we were given when we called based on the protocol that we were given a couple of weeks prior when we asked that representative of St. Luke's, hey, how long should the stay be? 24 hours, okay. Well, we're going to be coming up on 24 hours tonight, we were saying to ourselves. So if we could get all of the appropriate paperwork and testing done out of the way before then, so we're not waiting past the 24-hour mark, because that would be late in the evening, we would just like to have that happen. So, we were thinking maybe we could leave the hospital, I don't know, sometime that evening, sometime post-dinner time, likely. Given the fact that, there's always 1,000 little tests that they like to get in, and about a mile of paperwork, it feels like, to get out of a hospital. So, in any event, we asked for that process to commence. So, let's see. So we just asked to be discharged as soon as it was practicable. That's all I'm trying to get at. Then we hoped to, like I said, sometime in the evening. After we conveyed that information to the nurse that we would just like to start this process, shortly thereafter, a new doctor came in. Well, not a new doctor to us, but a new doctor to you, Dr. Wheeler, D.O., and another doctor that we can't recall exactly, came into the room and attempted to convince myself and Mrs. Smith to stay longer at the hospital without any reasonable explanation. But they really had to keep, over and over and over trying to convey different explanations to us as to why we should stay longer in the hospital, more than the 24-hour period we were told. We told that we told that we weren't comfortable staying in a hospital during a COVID-19 pandemic with a newborn baby if we didn't have to. We knew one place where COVID wasn't, our home, right? So, we figured the odds of a child getting COVID were much lower at home. We were told within 24 hours. This was our logic. We thought it was good. So the doctors just outright ignored Dr. Wheeler and the other doctor that were present. It was like talking to a stone wall. They really were just seriously did not even acknowledge what I said. It took a moving on kind of tone of voice and moved on. Leaving my wife and I kind of going, what was that? Okay. We have to understand this was a highly emotionally charged conversation, given the fact that the doctor's trying to convince us of stuff about our child that we just doesn't seem to be factually true to us, given all the information that we have and we've been given. Now, So what I guess I'm trying to say, and here's what's written in the complaint, is that Dr. Wheeler likely surmised that the plaintiffs, myself and my wife, would not be easy to persuade of facts that were not based in evidence after these attempt at convincing us, and therefore she claimed that a grunt that babies typically make to demonstrate a desire to breastfeed was not a grunt indicating hunger, but instead indicated a potential breathing problem associated with a possible infection in his lungs. So the story begins. Although myself and my wife were skeptical of the reasoning of Dr. Wheeler and the other accompanying doctor, and after much convincing on their part, Mr. and Mrs. Smith deferred to the expertise of the doctors present and allowed an observation period of our baby out of our sight in a different hospital room. The doctors asked to have him removed from us out of our room for an observation period of an hour. We said fine, collect more information, come on back, we'll talk about things from there. Subsequently, a chest x-ray of our baby was ordered and administered. Then newborn baby Jazz was out of our presence for approximately an hour while under observation by hospital staff in another location. Dr. Wheeler returned to Mrs. Smith's postpartum hospital room. She claimed that she had new information about our newborn baby Jazz and asserted to us that newborn baby Jazz's, quote, pulse ox was measured in the mid-80s. Unquote, and that as such it was she told us this, no-brainer to admit newborn baby Jazz to the hospital's NICU. So this was a real big surprise to us. Our child has gone from completely healthy to he is in such distress in this period of an hour, according to the doctors, that he needs to now be removed to the NICU. So Dr. Wheeler held out as facts that our child was born early, and as such he, quote, had too much fluid in his lungs. But the situation was not, was also, quote, in the same kind of sentence, where the next sentence, quote, something not to be concerned about, and only required him to be placed on oxygen temporarily. So it kind of felt like she was talking about out both sides of her mouth, telling us information was so distressful that he needed to be taken to the NICU, but also not so distressful that he needed anything more than the most minimal care. Once again, because reality did not seem to comport with the assertions of Dr. Wheeler, my wife and I requested that he actually be allowed to stay in the postpartum hospital room with us instead. Like, if you're telling me all he needs is oxygen, put it on in here. Get the same thing that you took him back and forth and that you are about to wheel him into the NICU with, that cram that you have attached to him with oxygen, just leave it in here. And we'll monitor him here. We still get to be close to our baby. It hasn't been any extra rationale explained to us as to why he would need to be placed in the NICU as opposed to the postpartum hospital room. But Dr. Wheeler was insistent that the care that was required could not be provided in the postpartum hospital room, and that our son could only be properly attended to in the NICU. That was it. Okay. So at that point, no X-ray results had been obtained, and if such results were available, the results had been communicated to us. And so by the time our son was in the NICU, on day 2 of his life, by the way, he was on oxygen, and nothing had been seen as far as the x-rays go at that point. I would have thought there would have been more stronger urgency with the process of speeding up the x-ray reading and results if it's concerning a child that's going to the NICU, as opposed to waiting a long time, like 6 hours to convey such information. One would think that you would take the x-ray, get the answer back quickly, because you would want to find out right away in a tiny baby, which is what the excuses that we were getting, that the place the baby in the NICU is that an infection could spread so fast in a tiny baby that this process of x-rays should be sped up. That didn't seem to be the hospital staff was acting. It seemed to be dragging out the results of those tests for some reason at this point. So to us, other than the one grunt, the assertion that newborn baby Jazz's pulse ox reading was at one point in the mid-80s, there was not any other known evidence presented to us to admit newborn baby Jazz to the NICU. We were assured by medical staff that it was not likely that he would remain in there long, given his apparently mild condition, and that placement there was really just erring on the side of caution. And from our perspective, whoa, was it erring on the side of caution. Dr. Wheeler also recommended antibiotics, also to err on the side of caution, in case newborn baby Jazz's breathing difficulties were related as to a yet undiagnosed infection. And so newborn baby Jazz was prescribed precautionary antibiotics in a copious amount from our perspective. Plaintiff Mr. Smith, myself, made it known to Dr. Wheeler that I am allergic to penicillin and erythromycin and many related antibiotics, and I urged Dr. Wheeler to use caution when considering or administering any antibiotics to him, because as a newborn he may be particularly sensitive to the administration of such antibiotics at such an early stage of life, given my sensitivity to such antibiotics. We were then reassured by Dr. Wheeler that there weren't, quote, any known side effects related to the antibiotic they were going to give to newborn baby Jazz. Mr. and Mrs. Smith reluctantly deferred to the professional judgment of the medical staff present and allowed our child to be admitted to the NICU because, when it comes down to it, you don't really say no in that position. You really can't. You're really being forced in a direction. Okay, so our son was then placed on a transport bed where tubes were placed in his nose to provide him with additional oxygen. At no time were we made aware that he was in life-threatening. He was in life-threatening danger or would be in life-threatening danger if the treatments recommended by St. Luke's staff, employees, science, or agents were not administered, nor were any alternative treatments offered to remedy these apparently mild symptoms. Despite newborn baby Jazz's being in the NICU, plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith were told throughout the day that the results of the x-rays done on our child were not available until many hours later, when we got them approximately around 5 p.m., I think. The results of the x-rays were conveyed to plaintiffs Mr. and Mrs. Smith as inconclusive, and that as a consequence of the inconclusive results, antibiotics would be continued to be administered to our newborn child. After we received the results of our child's x-ray, Mr. Smith went to Mrs. Smith's postpartum hospital room to eat some food. While in Mrs. Smith's postpartum hospital room, an individual holding herself as an employee of the hospital claimed to be a social worker. The social worker requested of me to speak with my wife. I told the social worker that my wife would be happy to contact her. If she needs her right now, she's in the NICU. She can go walk over there now and go speak with her. That's fine. No one minds if she needs me to contact her now or bring her now back to the postpartum room. We can switch places, and I could go to the NICU. And my wife. These were the things I said. She said the social worker said no, it's no big deal. Here's my card. Please just have her contact me at your guys' earliest convenience. And I said, okay, great. We'll eat dinner, and after dinner, she'll give you a call. And the social worker was satisfied with that answer and left the room without incident. Let's see. I went and told Grace about this. And so she then came back to eat dinner as well. We actually, for the first time, both left his NICU room together. Grace needed help getting back to the postpartum hospital room. I realized that I would have to help her back anyway, and she was only eating dinner, so we thought we would be gone for 20 minutes, a half hour tops, away from our newborn baby in the NICU. So we came back, and she ate dinner. And we watched TV, I think, and we're chatting about stuff. Okay, and then, and that really kind of ends it for today. At that next point is where comes in the person who I would call really the main villain of our story. The person with whom I hold the most animosity in my heart. Her name is Dr. Teresa Marlino, MD, and she comes in and she really ramps up the situation. So we'll pick up there next time in the next video. If you found this video compelling and are interested in learning more about the Smith family case against St. Luke's Hospital and its affiliates, associates, please select the like button and the subscribe buttons below. Each week I will focus on a new aspect of the case and how you can make a difference. Not just in my case, but by learning about what's going on here, you can hopefully make a difference in your own life, in the life of someone you know, someone going through similar troubles such as myself. I've come to find that my situation is more commonplace than I would like to see in society, quite frankly. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to let me know in the comments. Just try to keep in mind that I'm not only acting as the lawyer in this situation, I am one of the victims too. So please be sensitive to that. As well, if you are interested in helping my family through this difficult time, at this point, I really ask that you share this video across platforms to help bring attention to the injustices that my family has suffered, so that together we may work together towards policies that prevent what happened to my family from happening to others. That is a crucial point of this. Next time, we're going to get into the middle portion of the facts section, but before we go, I just want to thank once again Peter Hall and Leaf Grease for their article in the Allentown Morning Star. It's really brought some needed attention to our case, and I appreciate it to no end. And I really hope that other outlets, such as MSN.com, who already picked up this story, will continue to do so. I sure would like that. So if you want to contact any news outlets on our behalf and present the article and tell our story, I sure would appreciate that as well. And I hope to see you then. I hope to see you soon. All right. I wish you all good health and long life.